Colonel Wetterland was still having trouble believing it, but it appeared the King's Own 6th Regiment was in a great deal of difficulty. The wall, he thought, was lost. Knots of resistance, but basically overrun, and Northmen were flooding into the circle of stones from the north. Where else would Northmen come from? It had all happened so damnably fast. "We have to withdraw!" screamed Major Colfer over the din of combat. "There are too many of them!" "No, General Jalenhorn will bring reinforcements. He promised us—" "Then where the hell is he?" Colfer's eyes were bulging. Wetterland would never have had him down as the panicky type. "He's left us here to die!" Wetterland simply turned away. We stand and fight. He was a proud man of a proud family, and he would stand. He would stand until the bitter end, if necessary, and die fighting with sword in hand, as his grandfather was said to have done. He would die under the regimental colours. Well, he wouldn't, in fact, because that boy he ran through had torn them from the pole when he fell, but Wetterland would stand. There was no question. He had often told himself so, usually while admiring himself in the mirror after dressing for one official function or another, straightening his sash. These were very different circumstances, however, it had to be admitted. No one was wearing a sash, not even him, and there was the blood, the corpses, the spreading panic, the unearthly wailing of the Northmen, who were flooding through the gaps between the stones and into the trampled circle of grass at their centre. Virtually a constant press of them now, as far as Wetterland could see. The difficulty with a ring of standing stones as a defensive position is undoubtedly the gaps between them. The Union line, if you could use the phrase, about an improvised clump of soldiers and officers fighting desperately wherever they stood, was bulging back under the pressure in imminent danger of dissolving altogether, and with nowhere defensible to dissolve back to. Orders. He was in command and had to give orders. "Ah!" he shouted, brandishing his sword. "Ah!" It had all happened so very, very fast. What orders would Lord Marshal Verus have given at a time like this? He had always admired Verus, unflappable. Colfer gave a thin scream. A narrow split had appeared in his shoulder, right down to his chest, splinters of white bone showing through it. Wetterland wanted to tell him not to scream in a manner so unbefitting of an officer of the King's Own. A scream like that might be good enough for one of the levy regiments, but in the 6th he expected a manly roar. Colfer almost gracefully subsided to the ground, blood bubbling from the wound, and a large Northman stepped up with an axe in his fist and began to cleave him into pieces. Wetterland was vaguely conscious that he should have jumped to the aid of his second-in-command, but he seemed unable to move, fascinated by the Northman's expression of business-like calm as he dismembered Wetterland's second-in-command, like a bricklayer getting a difficult piece of wall to fit his high standards. Eventually, satisfied by the number of pieces he had made of Colfer, who still, impossibly, seemed to be making a quiet squealing sound, he turned to look at Wetterland. The far side of his face was crossed by a giant scar, a bright ball of dead metal in his eye socket. Wetterland ran.